One of the most harmful concepts of Christianity and religions like it is the idea of thought crime. That for each thing we think, we are accountable, responsible, and damnable to a higher power. And though these higher powers and these hells and these sins themselves do not actually exist, the religions that they belong to do. And so today I want to talk about forbidden thoughts. It's a crazy concept, one that many of us in today's day and age with the internet and the ease of accessibility to information can't grasp, not fully at least. But for over 400 years, that is exactly what the Catholic Church did. They kept a list, a blacklist of banned books, banned people, banned ideas, banned knowledge. This was official church policy from 1559 until, get this, 1966. And the influence of that list still hovers over much of the religious schools and churches and teaching, etc. Of course, they said it was about protecting souls, but the truth is obvious. It was about protecting power, their power. Regardless of your spiritual position right now, the fact that this happened so recently and for so long should be a warning to us all. What kind of ideas are so dangerous that they must be buried? What truths were they so afraid that people would read? Should the truth even have anything to fear? What happens when a single institution claims the authority to decide what you get to know? And of course, what does it say about that institution and their confidence in their doctrine if they have to be afraid of a book, of an idea, of a thought? So this is going to be our focus for today. We're going to talk about the Index of Forbidden Books. We'll talk about why the index was created specifically. We'll talk about what books and thinkers and people were on that list. We'll talk about how the index itself worked, what the penalties were, the censorship, the fear, the control. We'll talk about the pushback, these wonderful rebels who read anyways. And we'll talk about the legacy, what we lost and what we learned. But first, I just want to talk about why we are talking about this subject today. This isn't fear-mongering, this isn't political, this is just truth. Censorship is not a relic of the past. We can see so much of it in the past. In fact, I've already covered the Library of King Ashurbanipal. I've already covered a bit of the Library of Alexandria or the murder of Hypatia, what happened to Spinoza, etc. But it's not just those things in the past. It is a clear and present danger. And specifically, we're given an example today of a book ban, although there's a lot more to it than that. That really reduces it. But it's an information ban in general, censorship. And it can happen from churches, from school boards, from governments or political ideologues. Doesn't matter if you are in Florida or Iran. Ideas are still being outlawed. That's so crazy. Faith versus freedom is a timeless battle here. And though this index today was done by Catholicism, we're not really focusing so much on that part. It's about the battle against free thought, because free thought leads to rebellion, because rebellion reduces power. And furthermore, when you see the books that were on this list, these are books that shaped our world. Books and ideas and thinkers that without, we would be in a very different place. And then there's the loss of what could have been. How many thinkers were silenced? How many people didn't write that idea that could have changed the world? How many people actually did write it and it was suppressed or snuffed out? And this isn't to say that every idea that has ever been censored is this amazing, perfect, world-shaping idea, but much of them were. The Enlightenment, human rights, science, democracy, these kinds of things were banned. So much of what we now cherish came from these books that were blacklisted. This control of knowledge is something that I think we should all be fighting against all the time, because it is truly the first tool of authoritarianism. And again, just so everybody's invited here, that can be religion, nationalism, or political dogma. So I apologize for my preaching. Let's get into it. Why was this particular list that we're talking about today created? Well, there was a perfect storm going on. I think this part of history is fascinating, and I want to give you this context. A major piece at play here is the Gutenberg press, which happens in the 1440s. Before that, all books were hand copied, and this was a very slow process. It was also expensive, which made it limited, and the people with the power were the ones with the money who could afford to do this, and thus they could control a great deal of the written word, of the knowledge. But after the press, you could have a single work being copied hundreds of times a week. With that, literacy began to rise. Private libraries became a thing, and knowledge spread beyond the church, which was previously the keeper of knowledge at this time in this place, although it's not dissimilar to what we see in other times and places. But think about this. I mean, in Europe, for almost 1,000 years, the Catholic Church had near total control over what the average person could read or even hear and thus think or know. And suddenly that control was slipping away. I always think it's funny, just side point here, people tell me all the time, obviously mainly coming from Catholics, when I make some point against Christianity about their multiple denominations and what that says, and they're like, no, it's just Protestantism. We were fine. We were united. No, you weren't. You were controlling. People disagreed. They just couldn't. People wrote other things. It was just banned and demolished. Being so powerful in your authority that you excommunicate and execute anyone and anything that disagrees with you is not unity. But I digress. Let's jump forward to the next important part here, which is the Reformation. Martin Luther in 1517 hangs up those 95 theses in Wittenberg. Again, thanks to the printing press, now this information is being distributed. Within weeks, copies are flooding Europe. Luther's message is that the church is corrupt, amongst other things. The result is this Protestant wildfire that spread, and a publishing boom. To give you an idea, Luther wrote over 60 pamphlets in his lifetime. We know that over 1 million copies were circulating in Europe by 1525. The Catholic Church, Rome, is now facing for the first time a major theological challenge by way of a publishing revolution. So, the printing press, the Reformation, and a third player here is the scientific revolution. The scientific method is beginning to emerge. You have thinkers like Copernicus and Vesalius and Galileo. They begin describing the cosmos in an entirely different way than what was previously thought or known from Scripture. Earth's not at the center. We are not the most special thing in the universe. Celestial bodies governed by natural forces, not angels and demons. You're telling me disease is not caused by sin, but by anatomy and contagion? Every new discovery was chipping away at the truth claims and thus the power of the Catholic Church. So of course the Church has to react. And one of the most popular reactions that people know about is the Council of Trent in 1545, though it lasted till 1563. People picture it as this one-day event of people getting together. The council is a direct response to Protestantism and the rising secular challenges. It's time to reaffirm church authority, clarify good Catholic doctrine, and suppress dissent. So they reaffirm the Vulgate, the Latin Bible, as the only true official version. They condemn that whole sola scriptura principle. They declare themselves essentially the church, sole interpreter of Scripture. They institute censorship as a doctrine, and in so doing, the church is no longer just a spiritual institution. It was a gatekeeper of acceptable thought. And to that end, by 1559, we have our first index. Pope Paul IV creates the Index Librorum Prohibitorium. No appeals here, no nuance at all, just wholesale banning, the definition of censorship. And I always think it's so funny, the formality of it. You know, they create a committee, the Congregation of the Index. Its sole purpose is to create this list, to update this list, and to police intellectual material across Europe. The idea here is that a dangerous book is like a disease. It can infect your very soul. At least that's how they are framing it with their propaganda. Of course, it is about maintaining power. But when described to the common folk, they're protecting your soul from demonic ideas that will take you straight to hell. And so they even get a vast amount of support from the people. Not that they really had a say in the matter other than revolution. But in this way, it's like they got them to vote against their own interest by fear. Sound familiar? A quick quote from the Council of Trent Decree: books which deal with, narrate, or teach things that are against faith or morals shall be utterly condemned and removed from the hands of the faithful. Another quote from the Council of Trent: it is clear that if books of this kind are not prohibited, they will do more harm than the weapons of our enemies. So again, they're not just fighting heretics, they're fighting irrelevance. If they don't control the information, if they don't control you through fear, if they're not playing a part in your eternal fate, they'll evaporate. This ban allows that to continue, allows them to continue, allows the power to continue. And it is amazing. Again, I feel like we need 14 episodes just to cover all of this properly, but in that short time when books and knowledge were able to spread before the church starts squashing it, you had real, everyday, ordinary people forming ideas, political ideas, spiritual ideas, ethical ideas, scientific ideas, all without the church's permission or oversight. The printing press brings this rain, up come the flowers, and then here comes the church just to mow it all down. But, as we might see here in a second, the more that you try to ban something, the more people are going to want it. In fact, there's a great quote around that concept from Michel de Montaigne, which is, "To forbid us anything is to make us have a mind for it." But let's move on to our next point here, which is, what was banned exactly? What was the scale of this suppression? I think oftentimes people have an idea that this was just like a few rogue philosophers that the church really didn't like, that were actively speaking out against them specifically. No, this was a systemic erasing of ideas. So there were many additions to this list. Again, the first one is in 1559, and at that time, there were 550 works on the list. By the 1948 edition, again, so crazy how modern this was, the list had grown to over 4,000 titles. The reasons that books were listed fell into a few categories: heresy, blasphemy, immorality, scientific contradiction, political sedation, anti-clericalism, even other biblical translations that weren't approved by the church, and even owning a single title on this list could lead to imprisonment, excommunication, or even execution, and for sure being the writer of one of these could put you in danger, or publishing them as well. I'm going to give you some of my personal favorites. Obviously, that first list had 550. I'm not going to give them all for you, but I will put in the description a link where you can see all banned books from all of the different iterations of this list. So if you're looking for a good reading list, here it is for you. Galileo's dialogue on concerning the two chief world systems was banned, mainly for defending heliocentrism. Galileo was tried by the Inquisition and forced to recant. We'll talk about Galileo in its own Thinking Thursday episode, I promise you. Copernicus had on the revolution of celestial spheres. Again, we cannot have the sun at the center, it must be the earth. Meditations on First Philosophy, one of my favorites by Descartes, was deemed too skeptical and too independent from religious authority. It's amazing, back then they weren't hiding their reasons all that well. Don't think for yourselves. Don't question. Don't not rely on us for information. Another favorite, who we just covered, Spinoza, is banned on this list as well. He did one of the worst things someone at this time could do. He argued that scripture was a human text, and also that religion should be separate from politics. The nerve of that guy. They dealt with him though. Giordano Bruno, who is someone else we will absolutely cover, wrote on the infinite universe and worlds, which proposed an infinite cosmos and denied the uniqueness of Christ. Of course, he was burned alive in 1600 for this, and all of his works banned. I think I mentioned Luther, but all Luther's works were banned, and his vernacular Bible was especially feared here. John Calvin was also banned. His Institute of the Christian Religion was too Protestant. It denounced Catholic rituals specifically, and tore down papal power. Candide by Voltaire, another future episode. We can't have any satirical works mocking church dogma, now could we? Rousseau's The Social Contract, which everyone here should read. This idea that man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. Oh, too radical, too revolutionary. Kant's Critique of Pure Reason simply promoted rationalism and autonomy. Well, that's incompatible with church dogma. So it's got to go. Hume has his dialogues concerning natural religion, where he cast doubt on many things that were important to the Catholic Church, such as miracles, the design argument, and divine providence. Locke writes the two treatises of government, which undermined divine right monarchy and promoted religious intolerance. So he's gone. Even like Hugo's Les Mis is banned. Why? Too much social justice themes in there. Also, of course, very sympathetic to revolution. Cannot have that. It is funny to look at some of those more non-philosophical, non-religious works in general, like Robinson Crusoe by Defoe is banned. There is some Protestant piety that probably didn't go over well, and definitely some moral individualism that upset the Catholic censors, but still, the overreach. And I'll speed up, and all of these will be listed in the description, but you have Balzac's Human Comedy that is banned, too sexual. Sartre's Existentialism is a Humanism is banned. It's godless. This post-war nihilism, can't have it. The political realism is too much from Machiavelli's The Prince. Goethe's Faust is banned. The representation of demons there was no good for the church. Milton's Paradise Lost is banned, which is so funny, but again, too Protestant. Thomas More's Utopia, we can't challenge wealth. Descartes' Discourse on Method was a promotion of doubt in general. Healthy skepticism on the nature of things by Lucretius, another future episode. Man, almost all of these will probably be an episode at some point. But natural causes, no afterlife, we can't have that. Even Don Quixote by Cervantes is banned due to satire of religious orders. We covered Pascal making his great argument for God, but his provincial letters are of course banned because they call out the Pope himself, and he was a Catholic, though not the right kind. Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan is banned for political absolutism without divine mandate, and on and on and on. Seriously, like every work that I truly love and hold dear that has revolutionized the world and philosophy and ethics and science, just not allowed. To control books at this level is to control thought. That is something that is so often not understood about censorship. It is the destruction of ideas that we're spreading. If an idea can't get to you, you can't even think it unless you're the original thinker to think it, and then you can't share it. You're controlling an entire population's thinking. That's just wild. But I spent a lot more time here than I was planning to. Let's move on to how the index worked specifically. To control thought, you need thought police, the Inquisition. Now, the Inquisition lasted many centuries and had many different forms, and we'll get into it more when we make it its own episode. But it's important to understand these are not just spiritual bodies. They had the power of imprisonment, of torture, and of execution. They had a mission. They were hunting heretics. They were enforcing orthodoxy. So yes, even intellectual heresy was to be put down. They would conduct book raids. They would seize private libraries. They would interrogate those caught reading or even holding or owning, borrowing, gifting, sharing any of these works. No book could be published in a Catholic country without first getting outright approval from a church-appointed censor. The censor would review the manuscripts for heresy, immorality, political sedation, all the stuff we covered before. There's this weird middle ground too. If a book was deemed partially acceptable, it would be edited. They would literally black out specific lines in the work, or they themselves would rewrite them, or they'd just be physically cut from manuscripts, whichever was going to serve it best. So students and scholars in these Catholic universities were reading cleaned up versions of Descartes and Aristotle, and of course, even the Bible. Just imagine that though, all across Europe. Libraries were just raided. Imagine the fear behind that. We take it for granted today. And of course, the church and apologists have had to change their tune and talk about how silly those books are, how stupid those thoughts are, how obviously untrue. Oh yeah? Is that why they were banned for 400 years? Is that why there was essentially a secret thought police that went building to building and sometimes home to home to destroy these materials? Because they're so silly? You can't have this both ways. It's just so obvious how afraid of truth religion is, how afraid of critical thinking and free thought. And it's so sad. So again, these public libraries are raided, private book collections are seized and burned, monasteries often self-censored before they could get to them, removing text voluntarily out of fear. Entire areas of classical knowledge, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, were erased. And thankfully, many were preserved in these underground communities. The resistance. And again, I don't think we can really put ourselves in the position of what was at stake for these people. Of course, imprisonment and torture and execution are always terrifying, and I think many of us can understand that. But one of the biggest tools here was excommunication, removal from the church, from community, from family, from friends, from everything you have ever known, and from heaven. They had all of these tools to threaten people, and yet still people resisted. Still people wanted their autonomy. They craved knowledge. It's funny, right? The first sin in the Bible is what? The desire for knowledge. That's what damns humanity. So of course it makes sense that the people who worship and love and follow this God would continue to desire to prevent it. Not for themselves though. Think about what these people at the top knew. It's not like they were all just die-hard, ardent believers who had this mission to glorify their God. No, again, about the power so clearly. Here's a quote, by the way, from the Inquisitorial Handbook. A man may be corrupted more by reading one heretical book than by living 10 years amongst heretics. They feared this knowledge. So for the people that weren't part of any resistance, what's really sad is they didn't just hide books. They stopped questioning. It wasn't allowed. It was too problematic. It was too scary. They plugged their ears, put their head in the sand, and went about their business. By the way, just a few more additional facts here before we move on. Printers had to register with the church. Imagine if this happened today. Unauthorized printing presses presses were literally smashed and destroyed. Some of the greatest printers and publishers of the Renaissance were imprisoned, driven to exile, and even executed. But then we get the resistance, again, so cool. Underground book smuggling communities, private little printers going crazy trying to preserve works. It's almost exciting if it wasn't so horrifying. And we owe these people so much. They kept knowledge alive. There's an incredible quote that I think everyone should know by Heinrich Heine. Where they burn books, they will ultimately burn people. We've been privileged. We can't really conceive of this in many first world countries today, but one follows the other. We have too many historical examples to be ignorant of this. Eventually, this was all abolished in 1966 by the Pope. Of course, there were many Catholic schools that still informally used this list, and many of these works are still highly discouraged amongst believers. There were no official bans in my childhood, but between the Christian school I went to, the Christian family that I was a part of, and the Christian community that I knew, I wouldn't have been caught dead with Darwin or even Harry Potter. I became a lover of knowledge. I became a reader. And though not facing any of these horrors that they faced, I had to hide many books from my mother. When I had my own place and friends were over, there were certain books that were behind other books, because when they looked at my shelves, I didn't want them to see. And you may think that's silly and small, and it is a minuscule example, but how many people choose not to read just because of that social pressure in general? How many ideas are never even heard from believers because they are stamped out by what their school is putting forward, like in my case, going to a private school, the reinforcement of certain counter beliefs, the incorrect positioning of certain ideas. Again, you should have heard how my school and church talked about evolution. And there's tons of modern parallels, not just in what's going on right now and the craziness and what it will probably lead to, but we have banned books in U.S. school districts. We have authoritarian regimes banning journalism and political philosophy. We have tech censorship and moral panic that echo the logic of the index. So just a thought for you, read what they banned. The church once claimed to have a monopoly on truth. The index is the receipt of that claim. But truth shouldn't be so fragile. And I can't say this enough, especially to those of you still doubting or deconstructing. Ideas are not evil. The only danger here is ignorance. Let's honor those forbidden thinkers and those who stood up so that we still get to know about them today. Not by fearing them, like the church did, but by reading them, enjoying them, spreading and sharing their ideas, which is a lot of what Thinking Thursday is about, by the way. And so like all history, despite wherever you are or whatever you believe, we can learn from it. It should be a warning. No one can live your life for you. No one knows the thoughts you have except you. There's no God watching them. And though thoughts should be taken seriously, and though we can learn to think better, we should never be afraid of thought in general. Doesn't mean we should act and follow every thought and impulse and urge. Doesn't mean that just because we think something, it's brilliant, smart, or correct. Thinking is a skill, and I'm not the first to say, but how well you think will determine the quality of your life. Everything happens in here. Every single experience you have is happening in your mind. The framework that you give it, the attention that you give it, the level of import or hierarchy that you give it, the rationalizing that you do, the biases that you have, all of it. It's happening right in here. So learn to think well, take it seriously, but do not be afraid of thought. You're not evil for having them. You're a human. And at the end of the day, it is really all that we have, our thoughts. They dictate the direction of everything else in your life. And that's why we need to always keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Alexander, Ann, Boris, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kiboga, Matthew, Perry, and Sean, my Humanist Heroes, Craig, James, Jared, Christy, and Matthew, my Atheist Advocates, Caleb, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas, as well as all of my Secular Scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.